This is Keegan's bio essay on Dwight D. Eisenhower. Who are some of our greatest presidents? Who, if you were pulled over on the street and asked, would be your top 10? Maybe your top 5. For many, the list is rather obvious. George Washington, Abe Lincoln, FDR, Ronald Reagan, maybe even Thomas Jefferson. Without doubt, all these were brilliant men, each with their strengths and each with their weaknesses. Almost every president had a high point in his career, a strong era maybe, a strong character trait, all that gave him an edge. All our presidents were obviously very worthy men, but are there some who are overlooked? Are there some who we pass over with thoughts of, who the heck even is this guy? Why is he even here? Who elected him? No, I do not talk about those many presidents during the Gilded Age. No, this isn't a speech on the true value and prestige of Chester Arthur. In truth, this speech is on the president whom I believe may be one of our best. No, I'm not talking about Theodore Roosevelt, not George Bush. No, my speech is on the man many spoke of as one would call a neighbor or a close friend, a man they called Ike. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the man with one of the longest names of all the presidents, a man of true faith, true leadership, and true love for America and its peoples. A man who served his country both in war and in peace, both on the fields and in the White House. A true American and a true hero. In this short speech, I would like to commemorate and expound on the great character of our 34th President, Dwight D. Eisenhower. In the words of the man himself, let us beseech the blessings of the Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. David Dwight Eisenhower was born on October 14, 1890, in Denison, Texas. His father and mother were never really rich and often struggled to make a living. He, along with his 6 brothers, helped around their farm and were all extremely religious. David graduated high school, considered lucky at that time, in 1909, and began to pursue a military career. He worked initially as a night guard to aid in the funding of his older brother's college funds, then, after 2 years, was encouraged by a friend to apply to the Naval Academy. Although he passed the exam, he was denied entrance because of his age. Eventually, his hard work and determination attracted the eyes of Kansas Senator Joseph L. Bristow, who recommended him to West Point Military Academy. David was thrilled, even more so when the application was accepted. It was here that he switched his name around. Because most people called him Dwight, he applied under the name as Dwight D. David Eisenhower, the name that the whole world now recognizes him as. He continued to work determinedly through his schooling years, graduating near the top of his class in 1915. After this, he was stationed in Texas as an infantry trooper. It was there that he met his wife, Mamie G. Dood, whom he married in the year 1916. They had 2 children, one of whom tragically died at the age of 3 to scarlet fever. By this time, war had already begun in Europe, and Eisenhower was anxious to show his bravery and devotion to his country. Unfortunately, that opportunity never came for him. He remained at home, experimenting and training in the use of tanks. He often spoke with George Patton, a general, on the strategy behind using such vehicles, but many considered his efforts futile, saying that the tanks would never really play a purpose. After the war, he drifted from one military post to the next, studiously studying military strategy all the while. Eventually, he was deployed to the Philippines as an assistant military advisor to the Philippine government. Thus, before he had even entered World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower already had an immense experience in both military and even governing capabilities. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Eisenhower, who had only just recently been promoted to brigadier general, was summoned to Washington, where he was made responsible for aiding in the construction of war plans to defeat the Axis. He then went on several trips to London to assess German strength and survey the American general's performance. In February of 1943, Eisenhower led his first ever campaign into Africa, where he beat the Germans and then began to invade Sicily as well as parts of Italy. His success and skill drew the attention of FDR, who named him Supreme Commander of the European Theater in 1944. It was during this period that he organized and led Operation Overlord, also known as D-Day. This was an incredible accomplishment for Eisenhower, but the stress before the battle lay heavily upon him. He truly cared for the safety of his troopers, and was always wondering and planning for the worst. Finally, after his well-thought-out speech to his troopers, he gave the order to proceed the attack, winning one of the most decisive battles of World War II. From then on, Eisenhower was a shining star for the Americans. He not only won battles, but won them decisively and with little cost. He was also FDR's voice, speaking with both Churchill and Stalin on several occasions. Thus, World War II created a man who not only knew how to function under duress, but came trained in being able to handle countries like future enemies like Russia during the Cold War. World War II was also Eisenhower's leap forward. It was here that America began to see a man who was both successful and fierce in politics, but honest and kind. There was not a general during World War II who did not have incredible respect for the man, and considered his strategy flawless. After the war, Eisenhower focused on demobilization and writing what would become a huge hit among the Americans, The Crusade in Europe, a recount of his experiences in World War II. Many hailed it as the greatest U.S. military memoir, and it brought him great wealth as well as recognition. In May of 1952, he officially resigned from his military service after many decades of serving his country. War had been his passion, but peace has been his goal, and when he had attained peace, he retired to become president of a university. Yet even here he became a sharper and more able man. Here he became more critical and began to learn the ins and outs of both politics and the economy. His service to his country had only just begun. In 1948, Eisenhower was extremely popular and had been asked to run for presidential nomination by both parties, both Republican and Democratic. Yet Eisenhower felt as this was not his time, and decided to wait a little while before he would attempt the presidency. In 1952, he began his campaign with the Republicans. He easily won nomination and then progressed onto the whole of America. His opponent, Robert Taft, didn't stand a chance. With his great personality, previous accomplishments, and the slogan, "I like Ike," Eisenhower blew away the competition, winning in a landslide victory. He was the last president to be born in the 19th century and was also the oldest since James Buchanan. He was 62 at the time. Eisenhower preached a policy of ending the war in Korea, containing communism, and having a frugal and tight budget at home in the U.S. In short, he was the die-hard conservative of that time. Eisenhower was effective as a president, enacting several long-lasting regulations that benefited America as a whole. One of these was the interstate highway system. During this Cold War period, many feared Soviet bombing and attacks. They also worried that if such an attack did come, it would take too long to evacuate the people from towns and cities, and would take even longer for the military to get to where they needed to go. Therefore, Eisenhower created a series of highway systems that allowed quick evacuation and easy transportation of military convoys. His foreign policy followed what he had spoken about in his campaign. He not only ended the war in Korea, but he deposed the extremists in Iran, Guatemala, and possibly even Belgian Congo. He also planned the Bay of Pigs invasion to overthrow Fidel Castro, although he left JFK to carry it out. Even though he was staunchly against communism, he was willing to extend an olive branch of peace to the Soviets when Stalin died. This eased the tensions for the while and relieved many frightened Americans. The crisis of Vietnam also started, but was left unfinished, under the Eisenhower administration. During his presidency, Ike was asked by the French to aid them in controlling a communist movement and influence in Vietnam. Although many in his cabinet advised against it, he decided to send supplies and financial aid to anti-communist forces in Vietnam. The conflict soon became more than he had anticipated, but his terms were up and he therefore had to advise JFK to handle the situation carefully but decisively. Advice that JFK obviously followed. Lastly, Eisenhower truly believed that racial segregation was a terrible scar and a problem for American society. He pleaded with other states to accept the policy which Washington, D.C. had enacted, one in which blacks and whites freely mingled without the problems of divided buses, restaurants, etc. Yet many states, especially in the South, still held to their codes, leaning on the recent judgment of Brown v. Board of Education, which stated that segregation was legal as long as both situations created for the blacks and whites were equal. Eventually, he was able to pass legislation which created a permanent civil rights position within the Justice Department. Although this was not a huge accomplishment, it was the first step since several decades in which a president had sought to bring racial equality. One of Eisenhower's great controversies was Little Rock 9 incident. When the federal court issued an order for the Arkansas schools to be integrated, many protested in the streets. Eventually, protests became violent, and in order to hold the peace, Eisenhower issued an executive order for the National Guard to intervene. This angered many Southerners and sparked questions about Ike. But in hindsight, we can see that he took the right path, even if it wasn't popular. In 1955, Eisenhower's health began to diminish. He had a heart attack while on vacation that hospitalized him for several weeks. Although he enjoyed relatively good health throughout his presidency, once he left office in 1961, his health really took a turn for the worse. Finally, after 8 years of retirement, he died in 1969 of heart failure. One of America's greatest heroes had been lost. Dwight D. Eisenhower. He may not be the one of your list of the greatest presidents. He may not be the man that comes to mind when thinking of those who are honorable, truthful, brave, and incredibly sacrificial in American history. But I believe he deserves to be there. Ike lived a life of devotion to God, his country, and his fellow citizens. Today, I hope I've honored him with this little speech. Thank you, Mr. Eisenhower. You are truly my hero.